Sorry to boss you around. It's always when it's the sweetest that I make you do something that you don't want to do. We wanted to ask questions, and now you want to nibble and chat, and we're back to the meeting. But that's just how life is. So, yeah, I'll give you guys a few more minutes. But we will be moving on to our second presentation. We will go straight through the other two, and then we'll have our Q&A, and that's when we will address your questions. So we have written them down. Please keep in mind any other questions that you might have, and hopefully we can have a really engaging discussion after our two next presentations. So, Dr. Jaman, if you'd like to.
Just a technical question, like, are we going to have a little extension after 3, or like because of time management I'm asking? Like if we don't have, like if we have to empty the room exactly at 3, then I'm going to like considerably shorten my presentation. Otherwise, my colleague is not going to have enough time. That's fine.
She will.
Or, but if it, I can start and yeah.
My understanding is if you can try to give us as much detail as possible and short as much time as possible, please do
Very
so.
diplomatic.
Very diplomatic. Okay, I will try my best. Okay. So hi everybody. I'm really honored to be here with you today, and I will be talking about a case study, not like very theoretical. My colleague gave a really great. Oh, yeah, like this. Can you hear me like this? I really hate this. Can you hear me like this? Because I'm actually a very loud person. I worked as a university professor for a really long time. I have a really strong voice. So can you hear me like on the backside? I think everything's
If you'd
fine.
like to show off, yes.
I don't feel comfy with the phone. Like I feel a little bit like a singer or something. Like I'm not that.
Let
So-
me know because it's also for our viewers online. So are we
Oh,
still?
okay. Can I put it here like this? Is it?
I don't think it's doing very much. Would you like me to hold it for you?
No.
I can hold it for you.
Thank you so much. All right. So we're losing a lot of time. So from stigmatization to solidarity, this is a case study. I am. Can you hear me? I have a feeling it doesn't work.
My phone working?
No.
Just
There we
accidentally.
All right. Okay. So let's restart. From stigmatization to solidarity. This is a case study, and my colleague gave a really theoretical approach about human rights law, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about application of this law, like how it works on a case basis. So I am originally from Turkey. I'm a Turkish academic. I came to Canada in 2015, and it's basically closely related to me, not only because of from an academic perspective, but also from a personal perspective, because I am one of the victims, academic victims of the purge that is going on in Turkey, that has been going on in Turkey since 2016. So what this presentation is going to include is like basically what has happened and stigmatization among which communities, which groups are happening in Turkey. I will talk about that. I'm going to talk about some reasons of failure, why we cannot handle it, why we cannot fight against this purge in Turkey and outside, like among the communities that live like in Canada or in Germany or in UK, and what type of solution models, like how can we actually as victims of this purge, or as people who are citizens of this country are not very happy with what's going on in their country. So what can we do? How can we raise our voice? How can we make us heard by other people so that we can actually change people's perceptions on Turkey or on other authoritarian regimes, so that those regimes don't feel that comfortable, because they feel really comfortable, especially Turkish government enjoys being a NATO member, and they're still technically in negotiation with the European Union, they're in the European Council, so they're like everywhere presenting themselves, well, we're a good functioning democracy, so what's going on? And we just want to show it's not that easy. So let's get started with the introduction. So everything started with a military coup attempt in 2015, 15 July, and this is, there are a lot of different opinions about this coup, but what we know is it was not a normal coup. I mean, one thing is for sure, the government knew about this coup before it happened, We don't know. We don't know what, how it was organized, whether it was a really staged one, or it was a fake coup, or it was a real coup that the intelligence came to the government and they knew before the coup happened. But one thing is for sure, they knew that the coup would happen because they were ready. There were lists of blacklisted people, especially public servants as myself. Like I used to be a professor at a Turkish university, at the Turkish German University. I will talk about it a little bit later. And then after the coup attempt, we had 2 years of state of emergency in Turkey. What is state of emergency? Maybe my colleague would explain it in a more technical terms, but state of emergency is actually extraordinary law. It is not foreseen by the constitution of a government. A constitution is the main framework of a government. How a government works is about the constitution, right? You cannot do anything that violates your constitution if you're a state. So many authoritarian regimes even violate their own constitution, especially in extraordinary time periods, like Turkey using the argument of, well, we are being in a very extraordinary time. We need to fight against those enemies of the state, so we cannot fight them effectively in the framework of law. So what we have to do is like we have to go with extraordinary law. Like outside of law, we should find some solutions to get rid of those people. Right? This is how it works. So emergency decrees bypassed judicial oversight. Judicial oversight is like if there is a mistake in the judicial process, there is a higher court that can handle the situation and fix the situation as well. But with this extraordinary law, like state of emergency, you don't have that tool, right? This is a really, really bad situation for people who are victimized. So, and the opposition voices were particularly targeted after this military coup attempt. So the primary groups that were targeted were, I mean, there are multiple groups, but the Hizmet movement is a religious social movement established in Turkey, but they were active in many, many other countries while being, their main operations were happening in Turkey. Like they had schools, they had newspapers. It was acknowledged as a social group in Turkey, and it was actually doing a lot of positive things as well. They were opening schools, giving scholarships, and so on. So this group was particularly targeted. I'm not going into detail, like you guys, just look it up and see the main reasons of why the government decided to target this particular group. And then another group is the Kurdish movement. The Kurdish movement is a really influential group in Turkey. Kurds have been deprived of their many basic rights ever since the foundation of the Turkish Republic in 1923. So basic rights are like, if you belong to an ethnic group that has a particular language, obviously it's understandable. Like let's say if you're French Canadian here in Canada, I'm a Turkish Canadian, so French Canadians are able to speak French everywhere where they go. So French is not banned in Canada. It's like even unthinkable to anglify French people, like to push French people to change their identity. It will be, from a Canadian perspective, wow, it's like, what are you talking about? Is this a science fiction movie? It can't happen. In Turkey, Kurds are like French Canadians in Turkey, like they're a different ethnic group, but they cannot have their own status in a constitutional framework, so their identity is denied. If a Kurdish MP speaks in the Turkish parliament in his or her own language, obviously everything is recorded, right? They're like, everything is recorded, all speeches are recorded, and they're creating text of it. And if you speak Kurdish, they say an unidentified language was spoken. An unidentified. If, for example, Barack Obama came to Turkey many years ago, he spoke English. And they didn't say Barack Obama spoke an unidentified language. So it's only Kurdish. It's targeted only Kurdish. So Kurds are a target, primary target. There are other smaller groups, LGBTQ plus community, Alevites. There are a lot of people whom are not liked by the Turkish government, by the regime. They don't like them. So there's a state-led purge. Now I'm just skipping a couple of things in order to save some time. But you know, if you hear about purge, you need to know some numbers as well. I'm not going to bore you a lot, but if I say there is a Kurdish political party and over 8,000 people, members of this party, were or have been detained just because they're members of this party, then you can understand there's something wrong. Let's say you are a member of the Liberal Party here in Canada, and all of a sudden conservatives come to power, and they start to purge the liberals, and they put them into jail. This is exactly what's happening, right? So it's something unimaginable. Like, there are elections, municipal elections, and in many Kurdish regions of Turkey, obviously Kurdish-speaking people win those elections. They become mayors, right? So over 84 municipalities, they just dismissed the mayors of those municipalities arbitrarily. Arbitrarily means they find the reason. They find the reason. They say like, oh, I don't like this person, so we just want to remove the person from power. And the person didn't do anything wrong, but they find the reason, so they fabricate the reason. So this is exactly what's going on with the regime. Over 500,000 people, 500,000 people were displaced. Over 10,000 houses destroyed in many countries, and you can go on, keep going and going with that. So it's just really, really horrible. Now coming back to the purge, imagine Turkey is a NATO country, as I mentioned before. After the military coup attempt, more than 50% of all admirals and generals of the Turkish forces have been accused of being terrorists. So they infiltrated the Turkish army when they were cadets, when they were 16-year-old, 17-year-old, young people. They infiltrated the Turkish military, and they were doing their military career for over 30 years, 35 years, until they became admiral or general, and then the Turkish authorities understood, oh, they are actually terrorists. Like, it's very reliable, very convincing, right, as an information. So, also, more than 50% of all medium and higher ranking officers, like, you know, colonels and mayors and, you know, captains and all of those people were also persecuted. After the coup, the Turkish government persecuted over 2,745 judges overnight. It's 36% of all judges in Turkey were persecuted. So they took the judges, put them into jail. Don't get me wrong, like judges, right? So 2 constitutional court justices were jailed after that. So it's a horrible situation. It's not, you cannot consider it normal in any rule of law based order, because, you know, if you have more than 2,000 people jailed who used to be judges shortly before they were jailed, everybody would say there's something political going on here. It's not like normal. So purge in academia, and it's the last point, I'm going to skip that. Over 8,000 academics dismissed nationwide. It's really interesting. When you talk about oppressive regimes, like authoritarian regimes, numbers are always like round, you know, like 8,000, 5,000, 7,000. I say like 8,000 academics. The reason is you don't get normal data. People don't tell the information to other people. There's no newspapers, no media outlet that is talking about like, oh, actually it's 6,597 academics, like real number. This is not a real number. This is like we estimate that it's 8,000 because there's so many of them. You can't count by yourself. And the government is not informing people. It's that kind of situation. So campuses, the atmosphere, like lots of universities were closed, and self-censorship, fear, and surveillance. I'm just skipping those things. There are some methods of the authoritarian regime in Turkey that is used, like employment bans. Like people are, people lose their jobs, even though they are like not losing their jobs according to any hearing or in any like court decision or something. It's like deliberate. And then, you know, let's say there's a university professor or a judge losing their job, and they're lucky not to be jailed. and they look for another job to survive. Let's say they want to go and drive a taxi, or they want to work in the marketplace, or work in the construction. And the government labels them as traitors and terrorists, so no company, no private person or company can hire them, because if they're hired, they are labeled as terrorists as well. So it's a chain reaction of being labeled as a terrorist, and people are scared, and they say, oh, you know what, keep yourself away from me because I don't want to go to jail because of you, right? So many families forced into exile or separation. Like I'm in exile. Many people listening to me right now, they're in exile as well. They escaped from their own government, because if they would stay in Turkey, they would be in Turkey right now, they would have been jailed, or they can't survive. There are dozens of suicides. A lot of professional identities are destroyed. Like, you know, people are being labeled as terrorists or as enemies of the state, as traitors, and you know, you lose your face. They just tell you, let's say, if someone is a terrorist, I'm a terrorist, by the way. I'm in the list, on a list of 100 people, 100% terrorists, and they say, like, look, this guy he was faking. He used to be an academic as a fake. He actually was a terrorist. Now, there is a lot of publications about me, a lot of lists on the government, and people see that, and people don't have the means or instruments, tools, to make their own investigation and make their own judgment whether it's a fake information or it's truth, right? It's horrible. Yeah, so there is a, you know, from the perspective of a political science, like political science perspective, I'm a political scientist, we say there is a transition from a competitive authoritarian regime, which is not like fully democratic and not fully authoritarian, to a full-scale authoritarianism. Full-scale authoritarianism is like Russia, right? Like China. That kind of regimes are full-scale authoritarian. Turkey has become a full-scale authoritarian regime. I'm not saying it. It's just the European Council, for example. You know, the European Council is like literally talking about Turkey has the Turkish judiciary is depending on political decision makers. So they basically diplomatically say Turkish judiciary is no more judiciary. It's the long arm of the government. So the government is like instrumentalizing the judiciary, which is supposed to be constitutionally a separate power. Like we have three powers, right? Judiciary, executive branch, and the parliament, so the legislator. So those are actually constitutionally separated in Turkey as well, but de facto, like in Turkish case, they are not separated anymore. So, so when you were presenting, like maybe we didn't cover it that much, but there is a quasi-genocide, like a genocidal attempt. Maybe it's not clearly defined in law, but there is a term that we use, social scientists and humanities guys. It's called civil death. Civil death means if you're excluded from your community, if you're excluded, fully excluded through the government, and that the people, the overwhelming majority of the people accept it, then you are so isolated as a person, as an individual, or as a family, that you feel yourself like you're a walking dead. You're actually outside, you can't find a job, you are considered like you are labeled as a terrorist or as a traitor. Everybody is like whispering behind you, saying something about you. Your child is going to public school and their teacher is bullying your child or talking about the child's parents and saying like, oh, actually your mom is a terrorist or your father is a traitor. So this is kind of like how civil death happens. Many people are very upset about it. You get psychological problems. You don't feel belonging to your own society. You feel like an alienated person, right? It's a horrible situation. Okay. So yesterday I was, actually I don't like artificial intelligence that much, but I asked, what can I do to make it more understandable what is the meaning of being purged, or how does it feel being purged? And ChatGPT told me, why don't you give yourself as an example, right? Because it will be better for people to understand because like you're an academic talking about it, but you're actually at the same time persecuted as well. Talk about your case, and that's what I'm going to do. I hope I'm not going to bore you. Okay, so. I came to Canada in my sabbatical. Sabbatical means sabbatical is like 1 year break if you're working in a university as full-time. Every 5 or 6 years, the university allows you to go to another country to do research so that you can recharge. Because we're burning out when we're teaching all the time, doing research in the same place. Now we want to go to somewhere else, networking with people, talking with other people, teaching other students, speaking a different language. These are good things for an academic, so universities encourage people to do that. So I decided to spend my sabbatical year here in Canada. Not here in Toronto, I was in Newfoundland and Labrador. Its capital city is St. John's. So I lived 11 years in St. John's. I worked at the Memorial University in St. John's for 11 years. This is the university. It's just bad quality of picture, but yeah, so I used to be a tenured professor at Turkish-German University in Istanbul, so we came to Canada, we left everything behind, like our books and kids' toys and our routines and everything. And while being in Canada, there was a situation, like the Turkish government, I talked about the Kurds. The Turkish government started to bomb a certain cities and neighborhoods in those cities in southeastern Turkey, which is Turkish Kurdistan, if you will, or Kurdish regions in Turkey. And as an academic, it was very disturbing for me to see that the government is using like heavy artillery, targeting neighborhoods. You were talking about like selecting military targets. If you're not selecting military targets and using soldiers, your army, then you're violating international law and you're actually committing, atrocities. And it's a very major thing. And as an academic, I was super shocked, and I wasn't expecting this. And back in time, there was a petition organized by a certain group of academics called themselves Academics for Peace. So they were actually stepping up and saying to the government, guys, we can't continue with that policy, stop and start with the negotiations again. When I saw this petition, I didn't hesitate to give my signature. So I gave an online signature. I gave my email address, wrote my name, got the confirmation. So that was how I signed this, from Canada. And then all of a sudden, the entire environment of academia in Turkey started to change. We were persecuted, we were targeted. People were talking about academics, those are actually terrorists, dark people, in quotation marks. Some bullies and mafioso people said, we're gonna take a shower in the blood of those people. So that we were literally targeted, and I was dismissed from my university back in time that they started the process. And then I find my name immediately after the petition. The military coup attempt happened in November, actually July 15th, 2016. And on November 3rd, 2016, I saw my name in the official gazette. Well, I'm not reading official gazette, like I'm not crazy every single day, I'm not opening the official gazette, but one of my colleagues called me from Turkish-German University and said, buddy, I saw your name, you're on the official gazette. And I said, no, it must be a mistake. And I saw my name. I was a terrorist all of a sudden. I slept as a normal, like I went to bed as an ordinary professor, and then I woke up, I was a terrorist. My state, my government was telling everybody in the country that I was a terrorist. So that way, my Canada journey started, right? Because we literally were stranded in Canada. We were not able to go back to Turkey. Why? Because the very first move, like they can't come and arrest me, right? So because it's Canadian sovereignty, Turkish government cannot come over here and arrest a Turkish citizen. So you are under protection here. Canada is rule of law. What happened is they canceled our passports in absentia. So what they did is like, your passport is actually a digital document at the same time. What they do is like they just click on something and then the information on your passport, when you're traveling with your passport and go to a border, the border officer is like scanning your passport and they get an information, so they give the information, passport cancelled. So if you travel to any third country outside of Canada, you would be deported, right? You can be deported to Canada if you're lucky, but most likely if you're in a third world country, you can be deported to your country of origin, which is Turkey. It will be nightmare. So which means we were stuck. So they not only canceled my passport, by the way. Okay, I'm a terrorist, professional, but I have 2 kids, and my son was 7, and my daughter was 11 years old, right? And they canceled their passports as well. Okay. I'm not counting my ex-wife's passport. She deserved, you know, like. Okay. So one small anecdote in order to make you guys understand our psychology back in time. Like once we always heard from our kids like, are we in trouble? Can we go home and stuff? And once we were in the car, and my 7-year-old son sitting in the backside of the car asked us, me and his mom, Dad, do we have a plan B? It was a smart question. We didn't have a plan B. Of course we said, of course we have a plan B. What do you think? Hey. Okay. So now this is the story. Okay. So what are our weaknesses? I come to the conclusion. What are our weaknesses? Like now we are in Turkey or in Canada or other international countries. Let's say for the people of Turkey right now, like for people who have been persecuted and they are still located in Turkey, I give a really bad news to you guys. There is no hope. I mean, in the foreseeable future, I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. So Turkey is still getting more and more authoritarian, not to the positive direction. It's not going to getting better. It's getting worse. Now, the only option that we're talking about, like what can we do, is about people like us, like me and many other exiled people from Turkey. What can we do in countries where we're located? And especially here in Canada, because we talk about Canada and in particularly Ontario, because we need to talk about an Ontarian concept. Now, what we can do is like, first of all, fact, we are divided. Second fact, we don't know about the existence of each other. Like people are here, but they have similar destinies, similar fate, but they don't know each other. So how can we first of all bring those people who are divided like politically, in terms of their worldviews, in terms of their religion, in terms of their whatever, they are divided, they don't like each other. They are kind of considering each other like, not like coming from the same country. They polarize themselves, or there is a polarization in Turkish society anyway. So they are continuing with this polarization mentality here, right? If you're an Alevite, you think like, oh, Sunnites are really bad. If you're a Kurd or Turk, you have prejudice against each other. If you're religious or secular, you have prejudice against each other. So they're not getting together, which is really bad because they're all victims of the same state. So they need to get together and come to a conclusion. At least a few things should be common. For example, the constitutional order. We should get back to the constitutional order. There should be a rule of law. There should be separation of powers. There should be freedoms, basic freedoms, gender equality. Like, I don't know, there are some basics where you can say, regardless of your political difference, regardless of your background difference, you can still agree with other people and get together. So I think this is what we need. And obviously we need solidarity for path to justice. Unfortunately, the government is very powerful with dividing people, so they're labeling you under certain categories. One of the categories is FETÖ. FETÖ is the short form of the Fethullahist terrorist organization, in quotation marks, or Fethullahçı terörist örgüt, or Fethullahçı terrorist whatever. So what they use is this label is like almost magical. As soon as you use this magical term, everybody suspects you, everybody questions your integrity, you can even be criminalized. So I'm just getting closer to the end. So there are some common barriers to solidarity, deep trust deficit between different victim communities, fear of a further exposure. Even if you live in Canada, you're scared of showing your face and being active, for example, on social media, because you think, oh, I am my sister in Turkey, I am my father in Turkey, so if they see me being active outside of Turkey, they can take revenge on my relatives over there, so you just shut up and don't say anything. So this is a very common thing. You're scared, basically. Many people coming from Turkey, they have weak documentation. Let's say they're refugees, they don't have Canadian citizenship, they feel unsafe, they think if I get too political, maybe who knows, I'm gonna get in trouble, right? And many, many other reasons as well. So I'm just making it quickly. Path to solidarity, practical solutions. So I will conclude with that, and in a few minutes. Build small, low-profile advocacy groups. As this organization, like a few people are getting together, have a very simple goal, informing people, for example, talking about our psychological problems or whatever reason. Like you just have a small group of people and less political, you just start from scratch. Create clear role division and share a strategy. Use rights-based framing instead of political language. Like, instead of talking about leftist policies or conservative policies or whatever, you just forget about those things and you just focus on how you can protect yourself and change your country through law, right? To more objective goals. Develop informal, non-political networking channels. So we need to network. So you can use social media, you can use WhatsApp or any other type of platform so that informally you can organize yourself. And engage international NGOs and human rights bodies. At the same time, you as an individual or as an organization, after you create it, you can actually talk to them, explain your stories, give some speeches. Like this is, for example, a typical example. I come over here and talk with you, and you learn my perspective, and then you think about it. And this is a really good strategy to change, to start with a small change, okay? The way forward is to start small, as I said, create low-profile rights-based activity groups that focus on shared demands such as due process, reinstatement rights, and passport restoration, for example. When I talk about passport cancellations in Turkey, many Canadians have zero idea about it. They don't even know that you can cancel a person's passport in absentia. They see like, hey, you have your passport, I don't understand. It's really important to talk and explain, because we assume everybody knows what's going on in Turkey, in Afghanistan, in Russia, in Belarus, but nobody does. So you need to get active, talk to normal people, right? Okay, engagement strategies. Obviously, there are also major steps you can do. Approaching United Nations, European human rights mechanisms. You can partner with established NGOs, like not only contacting them, but as you have an institution, you can just get partner with them, or you can get more professional. Maybe you can join some other NGOs as well in diaspora. Okay. So Canada and Ontario offer safety, but also unique opportunities. Strong human rights institutions, our open immigration policies are here like very well established. And diaspora can build bridges between divided victim groups as well. Let's say if you're coming from a Hizmet movement affiliated organization, you can easily contact Kurds or Assyrians or Alawites or LGBTQ+ communities. So you can have other multiplicators, other partners. Don't hesitate to do that. And I think in Ontario there's a considerable minority group from Turkey. I'm not saying Turks, because not only Turks are coming from Turkey, there are other people identifying with different ethnic backgrounds. So basically we need to start seeing the big picture and try to connect with other people. Now, conclusion, the purge changed us all. I mean, it changed me, not only in a positive way, but in a very negative way as well. We still are processing our individual traumas, and stigmatization keeps victims divided and weak. Solidarity across differences is the only path to real justice, and small steps today can make real change. Now, after this conclusion, I just want to finish with my daughter Eileen's words. She used to be a grade 11 student and numerous years ago. Now she's almost finishing university, but she wrote an article about our purge, like family, and it was published in February, on February 22nd, 2022 in Politurco. So what she said is basically impacted me, and I hope it's going to impact you. She says, I once thought that these events had little effect, I mean events of purge and persecution, little effect on me, but I have come to realize that it's probably the most impactful thing I have experienced. What started as losing my passport changed my life in a single day. I want to think that I'm overall that now, but even writing it on paper here today, I can't convince myself that it's the truth. All I'm sure of is that the person I am today has been shaped by this major event. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is only for my future self to figure out. And I think our future selves in the future are going to figure out what is the best, but we will heal and we will get better. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you.
So we're just going to switch over really quickly to Joanne's presentation, if I could get help with the tech team. And in the meantime, while that's happening, if I can just thank you so much and commend you for sharing your personal story with us. I think ChatGPT was right to tell you to do that. And it's heartbreaking. Your story is heartbreaking. What's even more heartbreaking is to hear that there are thousands and hundreds of thousands of others that are going through similar things all around the world, that are others that aren't as privileged to be able to get out.
Yeah,
And if I can try my best to give the tiniest glimmer of positivity in all of these sad situations. Another reason why I want to thank you is I can imagine speaking about these things publicly with us doesn't help your reputation as a terrorist. I'm sure it makes it
it's
worse.
undermining my terrorist
And
spirit.
we've seen around the world that there are a lot of coercive forces being applied to keep people to be quiet and to not speak. And I was recently in another seminar similar to this with judges of the International Criminal Court who were sanctioned because of the work that they're doing investigating crimes in Afghanistan and in Palestine. And something very inspiring that they said at the end of that seminar was, at least we know that we're doing something right. Some of them were saying, I'm proud to be sanctioned. And in the same way, I don't think that we should be proud to be labeled as terrorists. And as devastating as it is, you know that you are doing something right. And thank you so much for doing that today with us, here, speaking with us. And on to our final speaker, and someone who has also dedicated much of their life to doing the right thing and to sharing with us how you can do the right thing. I'm very much looking forward to seeing your film soon.
Thanks.
Please, I give the floor to the wonderful Joanne Hodges.
Thank you. You know, I realized that I think perhaps when you invited me to come, you wanted me to talk about Tigray for case studies. And here I am. I prepared this whole thing about justice in the gaps, partly from my experience with the Alliance of Genocide Victim Communities. If you want someone to talk about Tigray, either I can come back sometime or someone else can, of course, at any time. This was just such a powerful research that we kind of did at the Alliance, or really a realization, and it's something that we've shared with a couple of communities, and I thought, especially because there are so many different communities that come to these events, that this could be something helpful for everybody who actually comes today. So I just, by a little, I guess, further explanation, how I got into this work partly is because I do have personal connections to people who have been impacted by conflict and displacement and atrocity crimes and repression. My dad and his extended family were all from Tigray in Ethiopia. And when the war broke out there, that is really what activated me, as was mentioned in the introduction. And I wanted to just begin with this acknowledgement that many communities and individuals, as we just heard, who are affected by conflict and have you have relatives in the diaspora, are living with suffering. That this is not a moment where suffering is behind us. It's not a time where we're looking back from a distance. I believe that many of us probably who have been impacted by atrocity crimes like this would like a total political reset in some of our countries of origin, or where we've experienced some of these crimes, and we want, you know, new leadership, fresh faces, things like that. But we also know something else, that communities who've been affected by mass violence, they can't wait for justice systems to start working before asking what can actually be done right now. And so today I just wanted to speak about justice in the gaps and the forms of justice communities around the world have built when formal systems collapse, essentially, or they delay, or simply refuse to respond, essentially, to crimes that have been committed. The forms of justice that survivors can actually create when it feels like the world has basically abandoned them. There's these forms of justice they're not actually consolation, and they're not really symbolic, and I don't think that they're really less than even legal justice. They're actually the foundations of any future legal justice that becomes possible. So I thought I would talk a bit about the concept of justice, highlight why some institutions fail, speak about what I've learned from survivors. This is again from the Alliance, because we have 8 communities that have been impacted by genocide, and they're at various sort of different phases of actually getting justice, essentially. So, and then make a couple of notes on suggestions, and you can kind of draw your own conclusions from some of those discoveries. But it's very clear that when states and institutions fail, survivors are the ones that lead. And when survivors lead, justice actually really does become possible. So just what is actually justice? We go to that. Justice is, I think most people, when we imagine it, we think of courts and trials and verdicts and punishment. But legal justice is actually just one portion of what true justice requires. There's transitional justice, which is just a way communities respond to serious past abuses so they can find truth, accountability, healing, hopefully reconciliation. The processes and mechanisms societies use to address past human rights abuses and large-scale trauma in order to ensure accountability, serve justice, achieve reconciliation. That is how we define transitional justice. We know that transitional justice has 6 dimensions, so let me just put it up for a second. There's retributive justice, which is punishment for perpetrators. Restorative justice, which is repairing relationships and community. Transformative justice, which is changing the systems that caused the harm. Preventative justice, which is ensuring the violence cannot happen again. Epistemic justice, which is restoring the voice and credibility of survivors. And distributive justice, which is repairing injustice in resources and land and opportunity and power. And I just want to touch on topics and ideas that kind of fit into these different categories and things that I've learned from the Alliance and working with these different communities now. If we only wait for retributive justice in the courts, we lose decades, really, of possibility. Every other form of justice begins long before those institutions kind of arrive. So legal justice alone is never enough. Studies confirm that legal mechanisms cannot actually meet all the needs of a victim. Victims consistently desire acknowledgement, memory, reform, apology, guarantee of non-recurrence, reparation, truth, safety, dignity. And truth really belongs in many ways to survivors. There are things survivors know that institutions just don't know. We call this survivor epistemology. Professor and anthropologist Veena Das writes, violence enters the world through institutions, but it is the everyday where recovery is actually forced. And I think there's a real truth to that. Institutions, governments, armies, political parties are often the source of trauma. And it can't actually be institutions alone that lead communities out of trauma. It's everyday people, neighbors, families, diaspora networks, the survivors themselves. And peace scholar John Paul Ladark writes, "Durable peace cannot be built by political elites alone. It requires the moral imagination of ordinary people." This quote really shifts, I think, the center of justice away from formal institutions and towards survivors and communities. This is why justice in the gaps is not just like charity, it's not keeping busy, it's not survival mode. It's actually the real work of rebuilding people in the aftermath of atrocity crimes. So what does this mean for communities that have been impacted? It means survivors know truth before institutions do, which is what we said at the beginning. Survivors define justice before courts do. Survivors build the future before politicians do. And that's not really like inspirational, it's empirical. It's how genocide survivor communities have rebuilt themselves. And if we just quickly stop for 1 second, and I'll talk about why legal justice fails, I think we have to kind of tell the truth openly here. That international courts are slow not because evidence is weak. They're slow because powerful nations decide what deserves attention. Denial is politically convenient for some states. Regional alliances override moral responsibility. Economic partnerships suppress acknowledgement. The UN Security Council is in some ways structurally designed to fail in the face of atrocity. Geopolitical interests can shield perpetrators. Regional and international politics can sometimes punish honesty and reward silence. And this is the political economy of justice. It's not about the truth, it's not about law, it's about power. That's why affected communities can't wait for justice to come, not because they don't deserve formal justice, they absolutely do, but because formal justice is constrained really by political incentives. And having said all that, here's perhaps the most important insight I think I've gathered from global survivor history in some ways. Communities really save themselves first, and institutions recognize it later. To me, this isn't like, it's not cynical, it's real. And I'll just speak through some cases. When we're talking about truth-telling, and I'm gonna look at the Rohingya community here, I'm talking about Myanmar. Fortify Rights and the Rohingya Documenters Network, also similar to kind of what Toby was talking about. But even without the internet, without assurance of safety, without citizenship, without any international protection, they've really given the world proof about what happened to the Rohingya people. And communities can do this, not because you must do everything, but because you already know more than any external investigator ever will about what happened. And so you can share your stories. Fortify Rights, I believe, collected 10,000 testimonies. And they trained people how to collect those testimonies. So Rohingya men and women learned to record testimony, store evidence safely, verify dates and location, identify even things like burn patterns, collected names of perpetrators, they protected identity of survivors. And this was done while they were in Cox's Bazar, which is a refugee camp. Actually, I think it's the largest refugee camp in the world. There's 1 million people living in a refugee camp together. So they collected this out in the camp. And the documentation that they gathered actually became some of the most trusted evidence in the global genocide case. Evidence that 40 Rights helped collect was used in the referral to the International Court of Justice to write other comprehensive reports. It was used in legal analysis. And there's a universal jurisdiction case that's all cited their work. So you need to be really careful. You need to have some training. When collecting evidence, you don't want to rely on just one body's work. It's good to have a couple of collections going, but when the world really dismissed Rohingya suffering, they documented it themselves and they organized 10,000 testimonies. They created the Rohingya Genocide Archive. They built protection networks. They preserved language and culture also in refugee camps. And they mapped destroyed villages from their memory. So it was the community first and institutions that came later. And then still with the community, the Rohingya community, the importance of narrative. I just wanted to, no, yeah, that's right. So there's a youth documentation theater project that actually happened here in Ontario. It's called I Am Rohingya, where the youth were telling their own genocide stories on stage. This was created by Rohingya teens, really, with $500. They collected testimony. They turned it into a script. They performed it here. The CBC picked it up on, I think it was CBC Radio, announced it. The show sold out. They added a couple of more shows because it sold out. And then they ended up touring all over the nation. And actually, they even performed it globally. They preserved memory. They empowered their youth. And then they actually created a documentary about the play. And the documentary toured the world. So I think I have a picture of that too. That's just an image from their documentary site. And this to me is a great example of what we call post-memory activism, which is youth becoming guardians of truth. And I think youth in any of our communities can really do things like this: storytelling, art, civic leadership. And I can't emphasize this one point enough, is that it needs to be done in English. I think a lot of our communities, even at the Alliance, we speak in our own languages because we're comfortable with it, but then you're really just talking to yourself like in an echo chamber. So if you create these products or at least subtitle them in English, then you can reach a greater audience. The act of remembering is really important. Being able to remember important dates where things happen to your community. Building monuments, even when it's complicated. And here we learned something from the Tamil community. In Sri Lanka, the Tamil community had a genocide a number of years ago. And Sri Lanka, the perpetrating government is still in power, and there's been no accountability for what happened. Sri Lanka has repeatedly banned or restricted any memorial event for Tamil civilians. Even a memorial the community actually put up in 2018 or it's 2019, something like that. It was taken down by the government in 2021. So they funded it themselves, and the government just tore it down 3 years later. The largest Tamil diaspora in the world is actually here in Ontario. And I think it's somewhere around 300 and some thousand people as part of the Tamil diaspora are all here. And in Brampton, just last year, they set up a memorial to the genocide, calling it a genocide. And since last year when it opened, it's been vandalized 4 times, but no one is going to take that memorial down. It was the city council that approved it. The police are investigating who has been vandalizing it, and they actually just I think they arrested the latest vandal just 3 weeks ago. So we can do things like that, where we have large collectives of diaspora. We can think, especially in a democratic space, we can think about how we can influence and remember or put up monuments. And then being heard is understood as a really important part of justice, actually. Trauma scholars confirm this. Bessel van der Kolk, the author of The Body Keeps the Score, says, healing is the reclaiming of voice. And Judith Herman, a prominent psychiatrist and author who's renowned for her work on trauma and recovery, says, recovery actually begins. Recovery begins when the survivor tells the story. So to be heard is one of the deepest needs of victims, and truth commissions show that. Acknowledgement is often valued as much as punishment. So the Argentina National Commission, Chile's National Commission, the truth-telling and being heard was so valuable, so important, it was seen as really a part of the justice. The renowned South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission suggests that victims actually prioritized the truth and acknowledgement of what happened over the simple demand of criminal prosecution, especially in contexts where there was widespread prosecution, prosecution was not feasible. So while punishment addresses the perpetrator, acknowledgement actually addresses the victim's need for their reality to be validated in a public way. So in Tigray, we did see some of this where clergy wrote names. We saw collages of victim photos, health workers kept lists, the diaspora documented digital evidence of voice notes, and all of that is like part of justice. We can also be creative and think of ways to validate experience and let people tell their stories. And we can think of creative ways to do that internationally, too, in diasporas. We don't need to wait for the government or institutions or even truth commissions to do this. We can create space for people to tell their stories and to actually be heard. When no one is listening to you, you can actually listen to each other. And at the Alliance of Genocide Victim Communities, we've actually found this to be a healing thing, even in some of our meetings where we're listening to each other's stories. One of the key learnings the Tigray community in Toronto has learned is actually from the Tutsi community. And so I'll just talk a little bit about that and the power of listening. Every April to July, so the genocide for the Tutsi community in Rwanda happened between April and July. And every April to July in Tutsi communities around the world, not those in Rwanda, but here in the Toronto this happens, there's all sorts of gatherings that they host. They host them in people's houses, they host them at churches, they host them in parks, they host them 2 p.m. on a Thursday and 7 p.m. on a Sunday, all over between April and July. And when you gather together, what's amazing is every person is given the opportunity to speak. And there's a social commitment that they've made to one another that they will, when you decide to go to one of these events, you will stay until every person is done talking. And sometimes, I've talked to some of the Tutsi community members here, they say regularly, even those who were second generation and they're born after the genocide, they stay till 2 a.m. at someone's house because not everyone's had the chance to speak yet. And just the act of sitting and listening and bearing witness have become an incredibly important part of their healing, because the other component to this is that the genocide in Rwanda with the Tutsi community was very one-on-one. A lot of the genocide was done with machetes. There were the number of perpetrators that exist. There was no jail. There was no possibility to hold them in detention anywhere because there were so many people who were actually engaged in the genocide. So they had to be creative in thinking of other ways to have a sense of justice and closure, and how do you do that moving forward? So ultimately, international justice or national justice fails sometimes because truth is inconvenient for those in power. It's not because truth is unclear. Justice fails because truth is politically inconvenient. And we have the UN Security Council vetoing ICC jurisdiction limits, regional alliances, trade relationships, etc., as we mentioned before. So communities can't wait. And I just want to quickly again, just before coming to a close, talk about misconceptions about justice. Oh, here we are. This is Rwanda. Justice begins with courts is a myth. Courts are the last, slowest stage. So justice doesn't begin with the courts. Communities are the first to start that. Myth 2 is that documentation can wait, it'll come later. Documentation is like an act of survival, essentially. Myth 3 is that healing comes from after political change. Healing will come after things politically change. The truth is that healing actually begins immediately, or trauma deepens. And we imagine that when justice arrives, when leaders change, when institutions acknowledge the truth, then we'll finally be able to mend. But the evidence from every genocide-affected community tells a different story. Healing really begins in the first moments after the violence ends, even while it's still ongoing. And I've got a couple things to quickly say about that. When trauma is left unspoken and grief is buried internally, when families sit alone with the pain, the wound does not stay still. It actually grows and it spreads into the next generation. And studies from Rwanda, Cambodia, demonstrate that when survivors receive early forms of social support, even small support, it will protect people from long-term harm. So small acts, we're talking about a circle of people mourning together, a safe conversation with somebody, a prayer gathering, a shared meal, a supportive neighbor. All of these things kind of begin to stitch the social fabric back together, and they experience better longer-term sociological outcomes compared to those who remained isolated the whole time. So waiting for political change is like is like waiting for rain during a drought. The community really dries out and the roots weaken. When healing begins early, even in those tiny forms, people regain their strength, their dignity, connection to one another. And the myth 4 is youth will understand when they're older. It's a really common one we found. It's a common belief in our communities because we say this to protect them, to shield them from the pain, but research again in psychology and memory studies shows something very different. Young people inherit the emotional weight of events they did not even personally witness. They notice things like the silence that's at home. They feel the grief in the air. They see photos that are no longer on the wall. They grow up in this space that's left behind by those who have disappeared. And scholars call this post-memory. It means that the youth are already carrying the story, even when the adults don't speak it out loud. This is why it's essential to involve the youth now and not later. Because when youth are given truth and context and language and culture, community, and a role in the justice work, they become confident carriers of that memory, and they become protectors of the identity, and they become builders of the future. But when they're left out or they're told, you'll understand later, they carry confusion, silence, the emotional heaviness, and they don't have guidance. So around the world, we see youth preserving truth when institutions fail, like the Tamil youth are rebuilding burned archives, Rohingya youth performing this theater, Armenian youth documenting memory, Indigenous youth reviving language, Uyghur youth are building digital archives, and they're not the future, they're the present. And in Tigray, as in every survivor community, the next generation, in all our communities, they're not going to just inherit history. They're going to determine how it's remembered. And so they really need to be engaged right now. And then just to close, I see we're almost out of time. Back to the bigger justice picture, let me offer an analogy. Formal justice is like a cathedral. Did I make a slide for this? Okay, not really. Formal justice is like a cathedral. It takes many years to build, but communities, all of our communities, we're building shelter. And shelter comes first. Cathedrals come later. Communities act first. Institutions follow decades later, if they follow at all. And for genocides, every genocide shows the same pattern. It's the local courts in Rwanda that were set up that were called the Gacaca courts that had 1.9 million cases. The ICTR, that's the official, had 93 cases. 1.9 million cases, or 93 cases. It was the community first. If you look at the Armenian genocide, diaspora memory kept truth alive for 100 years. Institutions recognized the genocide later, just last year, I think, in Canada, we recognized it as genocide, last year or the year before. Diaspora memory, community memory, outlived a century of denial. And the recognition is going to come sooner or later for the Tigrayans and the Hazara and many other communities. It will come. And if you look at Indigenous truth work, elders preserved truth long before official apologies. Commissions and apologies came later. In Canada, where we're still processing court cases 150 years later. But memory can outlive denial and shape national conscience and national conversation. So justice in the gaps is not a lesser justice, it's the beginning of justice. It's how people live, recover, protect each other, rise again. It's how communities refuse to disappear, and it's how I think they will prevail. Violence shatters relationships and justice rebuilds them. And controlling your own narrative is really an important part of the sovereignty. So I say take heart, take courage. The future begins before political change, and it's built by those who refuse to wait, who refuse to ask for permission. We begin justice, we'll continue it by thinking through how others have done it, and sometimes doing a little research and trying to figure out how we can apply some of those practices in our own communities and engage with them.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for giving us, I think, the most significant and credible definition of justice, being from the experts of atrocities themselves, and those are the victims and the victim communities. And in spirit of your closing statement, in the little time we have left, and in spirit of the traditions of the Tutsi communities, let's try to hear from everyone and let everyone speak. And so the first thing that we could do in that vein is to address the questions that we had in the break. Thank you so much for being so patient. I think I'll hand it over to Toby first, because the questions were immediately after your presentation and mostly directed to you. So we had one about the difficulty of proving genocide, and we had another about I believe, the situation in the US with the ICE.
Yeah, thanks. So the question on genocide, as I understood it, was about proving intent. And if I understood it, it was sort of, if the facts of genocide are there, surely the intent must be obvious. And I would just say that, I mean, there's genocide as an atrocity crime, whereby individuals are criminally prosecuted for committing that crime. There's also genocide under the Genocide Convention, where states may be held responsible for genocide. And the case that you mentioned against Myanmar for the Rohingya genocide, and there's a case against Israel brought by South Africa, and then some of the states have come in for genocide in Gaza. And I think that the second one illustrates, I mean, the first one, I think intent is, there's a lot of evidence of intent, to be honest, because, I mean, the facts support that. In the genocide case, South Africa is arguing that Israel acted with intent to kill part or whole of the Palestinian entity, and the Israelis are saying this was a war, and, you know, even if we overstepped the bounds of war, which is not I mean, I don't know whether they're arguing that, probably not. They've said they haven't done that either, but I don't think too many people buy into that argument. But their argument, even if sometimes we've overstepped the bounds of war, but we did not act with intent to eliminate part of the Palestinian group. Our motivation overall was military. Military objective is not genocide. I think it's the facts are always complicated, and I mean, we'll see what happens in that case. I think a lot of people are watching it with great interest, and of course the Rohingya one as well, but maybe more so that one even. I had never thought about the U.S. ICE operations as potentially representing a crime against humanity. I haven't, I mean, I can't give a sort of a qualified legal opinion on that because I haven't really studied the facts enough. You do need a widespread or systematic activity. Arguably, the ICE operations do fit into that. The ICE people certainly would argue that they're simply a branch of the administration of justice and they're applying the law. That would be their argument. So, you know, it's not, I mean, they have a systematic operation. They probably wouldn't disagree too strongly with that, but they would say this is a systematic law enforcement operation, which obviously doesn't, you know, there are certain kinds of measures like murder. So they've killed, I know about two, I don't know if they've killed more than that, but anyway, they've killed 2 people, but they're arguing that those were not murders and that those were enforcement actions where they had no other, option but to do what they did, and it was a restrained use of force and whatever. I mean, the facts always make things complicated, but I think it's an interesting idea that it could be. That's quite an interesting one. And there was a third one about the events in early January in Iran, and sort of the core of the question there was, the regime is saying 3,000, and Amnesty is saying 7,000, and I've certainly seen numbers. You mentioned 35,000. I've seen numbers in the 30 to 40,000 range. I mean, killing 3,000 people, okay, at the very bottom end that the regime accepts, that you're way into systematic and widespread. And those, I mean, the killings were the most extreme, only the most extreme part of that action. I don't know how many people are in jail, how many people have been injured, how many other things happened. Okay, we don't only look at the most extreme part of it, but 3,000, you're way over the line. Even if we say it's only that. Yeah. Just to say, I mean, obviously you mentioned in the break that some people are talking about that as though it was a genocide. By definition, that is not a genocide, because a genocide has to be an attack on a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, and that was just an attack on a political opposition, which doesn't fit within the definition of genocide. And I do, if I could just make one more comment. You talked about civil death, and you weren't sure whether that had a legal whatever. What you described there sounded to me like it would fit quite well within the definition of persecution. So you have a systematic, a severe and systematic denial of human rights, the right to work, the right to have a passport, the right to whatever. Many rights are being undermined directly in that context. Directed against groups. Persecution has to be directed against identifiable groups, but you described it quite clearly, the Kurds and the Hizmits and the Alawites and the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that sounds to me like it would, qualify as persecution. And it's widespread and systematic, so that has those other qualities as well.
Yes? It says it's on.
Can I just respond
Absolutely.
about one thing? Like, there's only one difference between persecution and civil death, because look, Kurds have been persecuted over decades.
Sure.
I give you an example. The leader of the Kurdish Workers' Party, which used to be a militant organization, a terrorist organization in quotation marks, acknowledged by the United Nations as well. Their leader, something's wrong with
Just
this.
a thing, or maybe.
Their leader,
It's okay.
their leader, Abdullah Öcalan, has been in jail for a really long time, ever since 1998, I think. And his, I think one of his closest relatives is in Turkish parliament as an MP. Now, nobody has ever persecuted Abdullah Öcalan's mother, Abdullah Öcalan's sister, Abdullah Öcalan's mother-in-law, or whatever. But as regards to Hizmet movement, I mean, they have started with my kids. I mean, I don't belong even to the Hizmet movement, right? But they started with my kids. Civil death is more comprehensive than regular, ordinary persecution, because civil death is using Sippenhaft. It's a German term. Maybe you know it from Nazi Germany. It's a kin liability. Let's say if you're my cousin and I'm convicted or considered as a terrorist, you will be persecuted just because you're my cousin. And this kind of situation is not comparable with regular persecution. It's way beyond that, and I think I just wanted to...
Just a very quick response. I mean, I think I don't think it's that productive to get into this kind of comparative assessment of who's being treated more badly. My point was that from a legal point of view, this qualifies as a form of persecution, so it is a crime against humanity. Whether it has worse characteristics or not, or whatever, probably we don't need to get into a detailed discussion about that. Other people have, there's a lot of different forms of persecution. This has many aspects, I guess.
Yeah, unfortunately, only one mic is working, but I still do think it's a very interesting discussion to have, because there is the issue of if it's not genocide for the purpose of a group being a political as opposed to a religious group, then you could always make that argument that, oh, well, in fact, we're not targeting them on a religious basis, but it's because of their
Persecution is not so limited.
No, I was going back to the question that we started on genocide, right? And then we moved into this. But I'm not here to give my opinion, so we can continue. Anything from Joanne? No? Any other questions? I'll have to walk up to you with the mic. Yes, of course.
Thank you. I have to preface this by saying that I'm partially deaf, so you might have to yell at me for me to understand anything. If Iran is trying to make a nuclear bomb, does the world have the right to do anything to stop them?
Thank you. Getting all my steps in today.
The easy questions here.
The easy questions for you, and I think this comes, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's a very controversial question. Under international law, there are only two grounds for attacking a country. One is in self-defense, so they attack you first. Okay, so Iran is defending itself, okay, so it's allowed to do that. And the other is under cover of the UN Security Council, which I think I would strongly agree with your comments about it's a slightly dysfunctional organization. The first piece I ever published in my whole life was about the time for the Security Council to restructure back in, I don't even remember when. I'm gonna betray my age. So technically, under a clear or narrow interpretation of those grounds for going to war, no. Nobody has, of course Iran is in breach of international law, which doesn't allow you to develop nuclear weapons, apart from if you're in a special club, and whatever, but there are some academics and some theories about the rules of war, including building on the idea of self-defense, that says you don't have to wait until they're actually smashing down your country to attack. You can have a peremptory attack before that starts. Israelis are actually in the forefront of developing that theory. I don't know if you've looked at a map recently, but Israel's a rather small country. If somebody starts rolling over its border, it doesn't have a lot of time to defend itself. So they have put forward, and other academics as well have followed in with that, saying we don't have to wait until they're actually attacking us. And so, for example, I don't know if you remember way back in 1967, the Six-Day War, that the Arabs were mobilizing to attack Israel, and Israel attacked first. And I think that quite a lot of the world accepted that attack as a imminent defensive attack. So whether you could extend that to the nuclear weapon thing in Iran, it seems to me that it's on pretty shaky legal grounds. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I do not want to see a nuclear-armed Iran, okay? I understand that thing as a threat to world peace and all of those things, but war is a terrible thing, and we have very strict rules about it. And other means need to be found, and there are other means, and there were other means in place, and whatever. I mean, I don't think we have fully pursued all of the options for limiting Iran's thing. And I do have to make one other comment, which might seem a little bit more political, but this current war in Iran is nothing to do with that. Okay? The Americans in June of last year did a few bombing raids into Iran on that basis. one fine day in February, somebody down south woke up and said, let's attack Iran. If he had been so much worried about the nuclear bomb thing, Iran has been working on a nuclear bomb for a long, 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 long time. Nothing was ever done, and then suddenly we got this full-scale war. So, I personally don't accept that as a justification for this war. I don't believe that's what's going on here. And if it were, probably some very targeted military attacks like happened in June of last year could be the answer to it. And Israel has, over a very long period of time, undertaken that kind of targeted military attacks to set back the Iranian nuclear program successfully, as far as I understand it. As I said, I'm not a military person, but that's not the same as what's going on right now.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? It's hard to follow that one, I know. Well, if that's it, then I guess we're just about on time. We didn't go too much over. I just need to thank once again the amazing speakers today for everything that you've contributed on a legal, political, and community and victim-centered basis. Thank you so much. Thank you to our viewers, and I hope that this was educational for you. And I'm not sure that we have much time to linger around here, but maybe we'll linger in and about these corridors and spaces if you have any other questions or there's something that you'd like to chat our ears off about. So thank you again to everyone, and thank you to
Thank you so much.